Goodbye World! I like visual novels. That should be clear from how many of them I've reviewed. Whether it be a static image with words to convey the story, or one that has you watching the characters moving around the world to increase the depth of the storytelling. This tries to be two different things though. A visual novel about two girls who want to make a video game, and a platformer you play in between chapters. Unfortunately, both of them are not great, and it feels like they just added in the platforming sections to pad out the runtime and not for any story reasons. This is not the first time that I reviewed a game where you play as a person making a game, and we have to play a game in between chapters. Unbelievably, it's sort of the third one. Dandy Dungeon, The Legend of Brave Yamada, and Takahashi and Hiroshi both had this type of gameplay. Dandy Dungeon would be the one I find the closest to the gameplay in this. They have your character making a game, we see the way that it improves, and he corrects problems while advancing the story. Now, while that would be cool if that happened in this game, it doesn't. And while the levels you do play in the platformer do get more difficult, beating them really doesn't matter. After you die 3 times, you move on in the story. There is no option to replay until you beat it. The game really doesn't care if you win or not, and that sucks. It makes these sections completely pointless. The story is about Kanai, a programmer, and her artist friend Kumite. This is really Kanai's story, and her frustration with people not understanding her game, and her wanting to make a game with her friend. The problem is the way the story is told, it comes off very dull. It's broken up into 13 chapters, and it will take you about 2 hours to beat this whole thing. And even at that, it feels like this very thin story has been dragged out. Time will jump back and forth from present day to a few years in the past to show the differences in their passion with game making and the realities of making an indie game. I like the idea behind it, seeing two friends come together and the pressures of making this game. But it was just so boring to watch. And it didn't help that the world had a very odd lens to it. It would often seem blurry and out of focus. The platforming sections were better than the story, mainly because you actually got to have some control in the game. But since it didn't care if you win or lose, it was very frustrating. It didn't add anything to the story. The fact that you don't have to win these levels to move on, it just adds to my belief that they knew that no one would want to pay $12 for a 50-minute story, and that's being generous. So they added in an hour of platforming, but they didn't want to actually stop the story by actually making it matter. The platformer has some very clunky controls. You break special blocks to collect them and use in the level. You can break them and reuse them, and you can even use them to kill enemies. The gimmick is that it's a Game Boy game, but if you're going to do that, why not show some improvement to the gameplay itself over the chapters, instead of just changing up the difficulty? Sure, it gets harder, but not any more enjoyable. In fact, the precision jumping gets very frustrating in the final levels. After you beat the entire title, this platforming game, which is called Blocks, will actually be unlocked to play. But after the title's over, you're just not going to want to bother, because there isn't much to that game either. Now there's only one ending to this. They could have had like a second ending if you beat all the levels, but from what I could see, they didn't. And it makes the platforming sections even more unnecessary. Goodbye World was not great. It was part visual novel and part platformer. It's a strange combination, and neither one of them really work. The main issue is that the story is too boring to be compelling, and the platformer is too simplistic to be fun. I would probably just skip this one. I like what they were trying to do, but the story wasn't entertaining enough to keep my interest. But it did have a very interesting art style, but the blurry looks to it were very distracting. I would recommend Dandy Dungeon or Takahashi and Hiroshi over this, if you're looking for this type of game. But for this one, I would just skip it.